So today we're going to create a simple wood flower wrist corsage. In order to start, you're going to need an elastic wristlet. These are typically meant for fresh flower corsages, but we're going to use them. Some leaves, a couple different varieties, some fillers, and of course, either 3 or 1 wood flower, hot glue gun, and your glue. So let's get started. The first thing you're going to want to do is the little tabs on the side of your wrist corsage. Those are meant for holding down the fresh florals. But for us, we're going to be using hot glue. So what I'm going to do is twist my elastic in order to get it to where the part that is sewn together is up by the top of the corsage. And then we're going to fold down those tabs. So just folding them in and pressing them down. They'll stick up a little bit on the sides, and that's okay. So you could cut them off. I just would worry about them being a little sharp, so I prefer to fold them over just like that. Now we're going to take your base leaves, so your bigger green leaves. These might be eucalyptus leaves or something else that you have. And I want to just kind of get the shape. So you could just create sort of a cross pattern with them. I like to do a little bit more angular and then work the other leaves in, but it really just depends on your preference. So play with what looks good to you. So I'm just going to put a little dab of hot glue and glue 2 of the leaves together. I'm not necessarily going to glue them all together because it'll depend on the placement where I want them on the corsage wristlet. How big do you want your base greenery? Do you want it more minimal and just peeking on the side of your flowers? Do you want the greenery to really go and trail down your arm or go off the sides a lot? So it's really going to be personal preference. So I create the little V's with the leaves. Now, you can imagine if you were doing the 3 flowers, you would need these leaves farther apart, right? So we'd create that little triad that we would glue together of the flowers. If you're just doing a single flower, like I'm going to demonstrate today, you don't want the leaves that far apart. So I'm going to want them to come in a little bit closer and kind of get a sense of where I like them. Next, I'm just going to trim the end of my flower if it feels like it's maybe a little bit too high up. Ideally, you might want to use some scissors. I'm using some wire cutters here because it's what I had around. But you want to create as flat of a base as possible, and then you don't want the flower to stick up too high. Now, if you're doing the triad of flowers, sometimes having a little bit more on the end can be helpful because you're going to be gluing them to each other as well as down to the base, and so sometimes having that extra in the center really does work. So again, kind of place your flowers, see what needs to be trimmed, doesn't need to be trimmed, or does it fit together nicely as they are. So back to our leaves, it kind of lays a little bit flatter now, and I'm going to glue my leaves onto my wristlet. So one thing you will want to think about is how the leaves lay when they are on your arm. So it helps sometimes to put it right on your wrist, or I will often use a water bottle. You don't necessarily want the long leaves coming right down over the back of your hand. So doing it on a little bit of a diagonal can look nice. You can decide how far in and how far out you want those. So when you kind of figure out your placement, do you like them out to the side? Do you like them on the diagonal? Then you're ready to glue them down onto the wristlet. And really the secret here is just a good amount of hot glue. Sometimes it can also be nice to take a little piece of felt or tulle and attach that to your wristlet as well. So if you feel like you're having trouble and your leaves are popping off, maybe because it's cold and your hot glue is not hot enough, then a piece of felt or a piece of fabric down there can really do the trick as well. And then you can glue right onto that. The fabric can even be glued down with some more permanent glue like an E6000 or a Gorilla Glue as well. Be generous with your glue. So one thing about making these is if you just do a thin little band, they'll pop off a little bit easier. Give it a nice big dollop of glue. You're going to be pulling a lot of glue strings off as you go, just par for the course. We're going to add in our next layer of leaves. So I've got these little smaller leaves that come in triads. You might have eucalyptus. You might have anything else. You can really layer in any kind of greenery that you have or pull from extras from a bridal bouquet if you're making one. So once I clip all these little leaves off, I'm ready to kind of figure out where they would look great. I can see these gaps on the side where I definitely want to bring the larger of the small leaves. And so what I like here is playing with the 2 tones, using these on a diagonal because I'm thinking of putting 2. These have a thicker veining on the back, so trimming that off a little bit with my wire cutters will help it just to glue down and lay a little bit flatter. So once I get the general placement, I like to glue. So I always do sort of work out placement first in case I change my mind. Although at this phase, it's fairly easy to pull something off, even if you have hot glued it down. So again, just trimming the little bit of that veining off so these will lay a little bit flatter. Not mandatory, just something you can do. So I'm bringing those leaves in there. I know that I want to put these leaves on the other leaves. but I'm going to wait probably to glue those until I've got the flower down, just because I want to see where the flower lays and make sure those leaves are seen. But this will give you the general idea of what I'm looking to do. So pull those leaves off and we are ready to glue. So give it a good dollop of glue, a little bit on the leaf, a little bit on the base, kind of where you want it. And then really important, especially if this is a thicker leaf like this lamb's ear piece I'm using, is you do want to hold it down for a moment. Don't just assume the hot glue is going to hold. On this particular day I was working in sort of a cold room, and so the glue will cool faster. So it's really important to get that good stick, putting all those pieces down, and sometimes I'll just even put it right down on my table and press. A silicone mat is a great thing if you're trying to protect your table, because it'll also just come right off that very easily. Once you've glued that side down, we're going to glue the other side down. Just same thing. You can work with symmetry, you can work what just looks good to your eye, ignoring those hot glue strings that are just flying around there. Easy later to hit this with a hair dryer, just to kind of melt those hot glue strings or pull them off with an extra piece of wire or just your fingers. So once you've got those down, give them a good few seconds to really harden in place. I'm going to put those little leaves aside and come back to them later. And we're going to glue the flower down. Be generous with the glue in your flower. You're going to see I really put a good dollop of glue. I know it's clear, so hard to see, but you can see that right in the center of the flower. I'm also going around the edge. If there's a part of the flower that touches the greenery, you can glue it, but you want to make sure that there are edges that are coming up, because you're going to be putting fillers and more greenery in, so you don't want to necessarily glue the entire flower down. You want to be able to sneak under it as well. Hold that for a good 15 seconds or so till you know it's really locked in place. It's hitting all that greenery. Good chance to pull off your hot glue strings, and then now I can come in with these other leaves and kind of figure out where I want to glue them. On this one I decided, as opposed to going out, I wanted these leaves to kind of come up and hug the curve of the flower, coming up at that same angle, almost as if they were growing right from the flower. So I focused my hot glue on being on the bottom and a little bit of the top of the leaf. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So again, just add that glue. And then we're going to slide it right under, holding it for a few seconds there. And you're pretty much good to go. So we've got 2 layers of greenery, and we definitely want to add some more. So I grabbed some of this fun eucalyptus, and what I love about these pieces is really you can use them in different lengths. So you can pull off smaller pieces, you can have big pieces. And so here I'm kind of going down and pulling off some little sprigs that have about 3 little buds on them, and now those larger leaves on the bottom, I'm going to use those too. So just really break everything apart and play around with it. Maybe you like the look of things being sort of wild and coming out really far. Sometimes you want to keep it neat and tidy, so it's a lot of your preference. But breaking up the greenery is a huge benefit to you, and you can use scissors, wire cutters, and oftentimes just your hands to break it apart. So I like to add my glue to the greenery and then put it in, but sometimes if it's a good spot just to glue right onto the corsage, you can add a dollop of glue there and put your greenery in. It just sort of depends on your greenery as well. If you can get enough glue on the piece of greenery, I would go for it. I often do a little spin there right in the end to try and get some of the glue strings off, but as you can see, definitely doesn't always work. So I'm going back in with some littler pieces now and just filling in other gaps. So looking on the side of your corsage, seeing where there is a space that maybe you can see the mechanics or you can see the bottom of the flower, just to make sure that everything is filled. So going around, working your way, seeing what else it needs. Our next step after the greenery is going to be fillers. So if you've still got some spots that need something, no worries. There's plenty of space where you can still add more to this. And it's always good even to just really give it a circle, look in all directions, and see what looks best. And I've got these green and purple sprigs here, and this is fun because they're pretty long, but as you can see they're a lot longer than the rest of my greenery, so I'm going to trim these down just a little bit. And I love to use the top pieces, the bottom pieces, all of it really, not just because it's economical, but because I just love to fill, and I want these to feel like a little garden on your wrist. So I love adding in these layers, breaking these apart as much as you need. Sometimes it's hard to tell how much you need to break apart until you kind of get it in its place. So just playing around with the design a little bit. When I feel like I've got it, then we glue. Again, none of this is permanent. I'm putting a dab of glue on here. It's enough to hold, but you could pull it back out if you needed to. Pulling the flower off would be more difficult because we used so much glue, but a little piece of greenery that you might need to adjust is no big deal. So I really want to come all the way around. I like in this, there's that V of the leaves. I really would like something popping out between those, just adding another layer and some more texture. So keep going with your greenery here, adding in those sprigs, remembering that you can use as much filler as you want. So whatever kinds of fillers you might have in your bouquet, match it with your corsages. I think that's a really fun way to do. You can also go with matching maybe what the person is wearing as well. I'd like everything to be a nice matchy set. So if you've got any other kind of fillers, even if it's pampas grass or bunny's tails, you can break those into smaller pieces and add them in here as well. So it's fun to add a mix of the faux and the natural. So once you've got all of this adjusted and the last little pieces in, then we're ready to grab our other filler. And these come like little sprigs that you can just break right off the branch or pull right off. And even these, you're going to see, I cut these apart too. There's the top part, the little lavender piece there, and then there's the bottom leaves, which are so pretty because they've got that bit of pink on them as well, so they'll make a great fill. And so I'm going to add all of that to my corsage. So I like to cut all the pieces apart first and then kind of play around with what looks good. So I'm going to start with the little leaves from the bottom and then leave the sprigs for last just because I want them sticking up and out. So I'm going to do the fill pieces first, looking and seeing is there anything else underneath by the base of the flower that I want to fill in that maybe I'm looking to hide the mechanics of. Glue in place. Sometimes you'll think you glued enough and you just have to go back and glue it again. Once those pieces are down, then we can play with the little brighter pink sprigs as well. And so now we're just adding those in. Again, a dollop of glue, placing these at different angles. So I love to have lots of layers in my corsage, not everything to just be flat. So thinking pieces up at an angle. Wherever you think the color looks nice. I do love designing with pieces in threes. So 3 of these might look gorgeous, but maybe you want more. Consider odd numbers just because they look a little bit nicer than being perfectly even. And don't feel like everything has to be perfectly symmetrical as well. You can really work with different angles and play around with the design of your corsage. So of course you want to just test it out by looking at it from all around. Put it on your wrist. See how it lays. Is there a side that looks better? And then once you've got it on your arm, give it a test. See what you like. Do I need to add anything? And when it's done, you are ready to go. These will be good until your wedding day, until you need them, or until your prom. So that's it. Super easy, making a corsage.